So I'm really pleased. We've got Zarina here today, and we're going to be talking about the environment. I think I'll do a quick intro to grab people before they go. Then we do the intro bit of ourselves. And there should be somebody else coming up, so don't be surprised if somebody suddenly pops up. He's got an interest in the environment, and it'll be interesting to hear what he's got to say. Me and him, I think we've got a lot of shared things I like to talk about. Like where he's been and I've been a similar thing. So that'll be interesting if he comes. So what have I got to say? First of all, what I've got to say about the environment is quite different to what most people have got to say. I think there are easy solutions, and you'll hopefully hear them in a minute. But it's something like, first of all, the world is not going to fall apart any minute now. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Like all this carbon stuff is actually really good for the environment. You'd be like, what? What? How can you prove that? And so I'll talk about that very quickly in a minute. And also, there's two other things that will fix it. First of all, our really broken society is making us to summarize, is making us live inefficiently. So we're not living like a community that works together. That's one. And even relationship between husband and wife they're not working efficiently. But also that has a knock-on effect of making us really miserable, and then we buy stuff we don't need. So we're really over consuming. And then on top of that, the last thing I'm going to say, the last part of the puzzle, is that we've got an economic system in ancient terms is called usury. And it forces societies to create more than we need. It's actually like an ancient, terrible thing called usury that's been banned in different religions for thousands of years. And now we use it, and we're surprised that we're having a really destructive effect on society, including supporting wars, this whole usury system. So, bit of a long introduction. My few second introduction is I'm a Muslim. I do happiness classes for non-Muslims, for people willing to think. Why Islam? Because it's a tried and tested idea, and it's got lots of proof to say it works. And why are non-Muslims? Because just to say that you don't have to be a Muslim to learn these principles. These are principles that anybody can live on. I think I'll do that. Serena, I've been keeping you quiet for ages now. Do you want to do your own introduction rather than me talking even more? Say something
Sure.
about yourself,
Hello,
please.
everybody. I'm Zarina. I'm spiritual. I worship Bastet, and I've done quite a few live streams on Kala's channel. I think he's really cool, really interesting to talk to. Environment is a topic which I don't really think much about. I mean, I think when I was younger, I had maybe stronger opinions on it. I think I was more like concerned about the environment. I was quite concerned about climate change and the like, but as I've gotten older, I've come to realize that a lot of things that we've been taught regarding things like climate change and the like are not necessarily what we know to be true. And it's really quite controversial. There's a lot of people who have done a lot of research into this over the years. David Icke is probably my favorite person who studied a lot of this kind of stuff. And I really think that there's a lot of hyperbole, especially in the news, regarding how things like, the climate and global warming and carbon emissions, there's a lot of hyperbole, and it seems like it's all designed to sort of make people scared. And this is a really common recurring theme. I remember saying this when I was on Pearl's show about how a lot of things in the media, the mainstream media, are just designed to really make people look bad, to make people afraid, to make people think that the world is all terrible. And it kind of makes it really difficult to have a more realistic outlook on life, because when we can't really go through life thinking everything's terrible, nor can go through life thinking everything's amazing. As usual, it's always in the middle. It's always both. It's like life is both
Yeah,
terrible and amazing.
it's a dangerous thing to have society on emergency mode. In fact, emergency mode is a way to control society. That's what Hitler did, for example. Or everybody, or they said we're under threat. We need to do X, Y, and Z right now. Do you know what I mean? It's a typical thing. Same thing with COVID and everything. We're under threat. You just stay in your
Exactly what
homes, all
happened
that
with the
kind of stuff.
lockdowns here. And it works as well. Like I remember during COVID, actually, not to get too personal, but my anxiety was so, 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 so bad. I mean, it was quite horrific, really, the effects that that whole episode's had. It's funny because it feels like it was such a long time ago, but it really wasn't. It was only 4 years ago. That's not a long time at all. You know, I think there's still very much a sweeping cultural hangover regarding COVID. And it's really interesting with the COVID and the woke and Islamic terrorism, all of these social issues. It's as if they're all sort of now coming to their own climactic showdown almost.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, because sometimes being a Muslim, I don't necessarily appreciate how people see Islam from the outside, or I can imagine from the news, you're not going to see too much good stuff. You're going to be, but I just can't take the news too seriously. That's why maybe I'm filtering it out. But anyway, it's very interesting. Okay, so here I kind of did a really brief introduction. I'm going to go in a little bit more deep. I've already got an interesting comment by Bubblegum Gun. And I actually think there's some useful comments there. It's interesting. So first of all, he knows what usury is, which is cool. Basically, we call it interest now. And what did he say just here? Can keep it. Climate is a way to trick people into becoming leftist again. Okay. Targeted. So okay, cool. So I purposely I know the sort of the feelings towards the environment have changed quite a lot in the last few years, because before, like a few years ago, people were on high alert saying, oh my god, the whole world's falling apart. And then a lot of information started coming through, and I think in a funny way certain people started supporting these environmental movements, and those are kind of people we don't trust at all. Like with those people, the World Economic Forum. So it's like anything they say, most people go, okay, we must do the opposite. So the World Economic Forum, the WEF, was saying, yeah, we need to fix the environment and we're going to help you. And then everybody thought, we don't trust you, therefore there's nothing wrong with the environment. So I think we should be careful. My point is, I suppose, sure, I'll give some evidence to say that actually we're not in the kind of trouble that we were told, first of all. But also, it doesn't mean that we should think our environment is indestructible. There are all sorts of things that are going on, like plastic particles in the sea, which we're consuming through the fish that we consume and stuff like that. And if you pollute the environment, it's not going to be great. So we shouldn't think that things are indestructible. There are lots of other things that we aren't just to do with carbon. What about the bees? Okay, we'll talk about the bees maybe in a bit as well. So here's the kind of quick overview maybe. So coming back to carbon comes from life. So carbon is good for life. People don't know, where did carbon come from? It came from the dinosaurs. It came from old trees millions of years ago, buried underground. And now it's come up as a fuel and we're using it. And very briefly, we're actually seeing more greening of the earth since there's been more carbon. And that shouldn't be a surprise, because at the time of the dinosaurs, we had twice the amount of carbon we have at the moment. And that allowed the dinosaurs, which are much bigger than us, so we had a lot more life actually then, and they needed more carbon. More carbon meant more life, more greenery that the small animals feed on, and then the big animals feed on the small animals, etc. So that's just a little bit of evidence. What do you think about that first? I want to kind of pause for a minute and get your feedback. So have you ever thought of or heard of anything like that before, about that kind of perspective on the environment?
I mean, I have heard that there's a lot of problems regarding bees being killed, because obviously bees are important because they pollinate our crops and we need them to make honey. I mean, yeah, again, I don't have a whole lot of knowledge on, so I'm not sure my input's going to be.
That's fine. So that's fine. What I mean, so you could be like, you got knowledge on lots of specific things, like me too as well. But let's just say loads of other people, if you don't have any prior knowledge about like CO2, and most people don't, because most people hear CO2 and immediately they think, oh my god, it's the worst thing in the world. And I'm just giving an alternative perspective. You can tell me if there's any holes in the way I'm describing just the CO2 bit, because that's a bit different to what most people think. In fact, most of what I want to say is going to be really different to what most people say. And the reason why I do my videos at all is because nobody else is saying it really, or very few people are saying it. So let's focus on the CO2 bit a little bit. What do you think about this idea that CO2, carbon, essentially came from life, so it can't be bad for life? Or was that a weird kind of logic that doesn't make sense?
I mean, see, carbon came from life, it come back from life. I get the premise. It's this idea that if it came from the world, it's kind of, I mean, yeah, like, interesting actually, you could say that about marijuana. A lot of people who smoke marijuana say, well, you know, it comes from the ground, it's a plant, it's a herb, therefore it can't be bad for you, which is a very interesting justification.
I think it is. It can be good for you. It's like medicine, but you don't take medicine all the time. That's the only difference. It's like
it's about how you use it, how often, what you use it for.
Yeah. So that analogy works, I would say. It's another way of saying it is carbon is organic. It's not like this toxic thing that we've been made to be scared of. But you don't have to necessarily agree. But what do you think about this then? The other fact I said, very briefly, I don't want to hang on to carbon too long. I want to come to the solutions as well. And I want to talk about usury, because Bubblegum was talking about it a minute ago. So very briefly, the other idea to kind of support that carbon is actually a good thing. So at the time of the dinosaurs, we had a lot more life. We're kind of, relative to the time of the dinosaurs, we're actually in a kind of ice age. Where we've got the polar caps are bigger and we've got less water. There used to be a lot more water. The Grand Canyon used to be full of water. That's why it looks the way it is in America. Sea level much higher, lot more life basically. And so when it was hotter, which was what we're worried about global warming. Oh no, it's going to get hot. It was much hotter at the time of the dinosaurs. Loads more carbon, but loads more life as well. So some people, I mean, you might be concerned about water rising. It's actually rising at 1 millimeter or maybe maximum 3 millimeters a year. So we can adapt to that anyway. So putting that aside, what do you think about this argument, before we move on from the carbon thing, that more carbon in the past, twice as much carbon in the air, created more life? In fact, we can see the results. It's not even theoretical. We can see already the Earth is greening. I can't remember, some massive amount. What do you think about that as evidence that carbon is actually good for the environment?
Can you repeat that?
Sorry. Yeah. Okay. So if you're getting confused, loads of other people would have been confused, right? I'm saying at the time of the dinosaurs, we had way more life. Like we had T-Rex, we had all the big dinosaurs. Like bigger life needs more, plants and all that kind of stuff. So, and at that time, we also had way more carbon. So what I'm saying is more carbon means more life. And we've got evidence, both in the past, prehistoric dinosaur times, and also right now, more life is being created. Like the Earth is actually getting greener. So I'm not sure if I helped, but more carbon is proved to create more life, according to those examples. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So what is going wrong? So I'm looking, by the way, there. I've got another screen. Okay. So first of all, I've said don't worry about carbon, but that doesn't mean don't worry at all. Like we're talking about bees. Bees are 70% of our pollinators, and they're dying really quickly. Why are they dying really quickly? Because one big thing is monoculture. Monoculture means we have miles of the same kind of stuff. The bees are going nuts. It's like they've got only one food to eat. Like imagine we could only ever eat chicken. Like you might like chicken, but if you only ate chicken all the time, you'd be sick. You need other stuff, right? And normally you got this thing called permaculture, like there used to be so many different kind of plants and something. I'm going to talk about that as well. People used to be what we call locavores. They used to eat locally, like a lot of people do in Jordan still, and many other cultures. But we've industrialized food, and why did that happen? I'm going to talk about that in a second as well. There's some very interesting societal things to do with relationships between husband and wife, strangely, but I'll get to that in a minute. So along with this monoculture thing of having miles and miles of the same food, we've got so much toxic stuff that we don't see. Okay, I've got two places, one in the village, right? When people used to, in the village opposite me, there used to be a massive farm. Well, it's a long story, but you could see all the spraying, and you really see, when you see food being produced in a bad way, you go, oh my gosh, I don't want any of that stuff. And then imagine if we don't want to eat, then what's happening to the bees and everything? Like we're doing really nasty industrialized stuff to our food, right? So there are problems. I'm not saying there are no problems. And now the solutions. Okay, so what the essential solution is overconsumption, right? But I'm not going to say just stop consuming. I think there are fundamental reasons why we're over-consuming. Okay, one is this economic system. Let's get into that quickly right now. Okay, so you know when you get money on interest, like you borrow money and you get interest. Let's say so you borrow money, you have to pay interest, and if you're really rich, you put your money in the account and in your bank account, and it only works with the really rich people. Like if you got millions and millions, then you get a few percent, and you actually make money for doing nothing. Okay, so that has been banned in Islam and Judaism, and it used to be banned in Christianity, but Christianity just given up on all of its teaching. So it's very interesting that for some reason this system was banned. Okay, but now we think it's normal. So you might be questioning, like, why would it be banned? Okay, just to get people. There are so many dangers, but very briefly, I call it a reverse Robin Hood. So Robin Hood, I don't think he was real. Was he a real person?
I mean, it was probably based on a myth, kind of with being, because a lot of like myths and stories are based on real people.
Yeah. So yeah, and the reason why I call it a reverse Robin Hood, because in the story he robs the rich to give to the poor, right? And interest is exactly the opposite. So the poor have to pay interest and the rich get interest. So the rich get richer and the poor get poorer from this system. So that's one of the many problems, right? But what's it got to do with the environment? Essentially, it's like this. Everybody, this is kind of like a high level view. Let's imagine a country is a business, and the business, and this is actually what's essentially happening. The business has to borrow money from the bank so that it can invest and create more stuff. But the problem is it has to pay back more because it has to pay interest. Does that make sense so far? Okay. The problem is you have to keep paying more every year. You have to pay. You borrow 100, you have to pay 110 back, which means you have to create from the land, because all wealth originally comes from the land, right? You have to create more than you borrowed, so you're creating unnecessary stuff, and the cycle keeps going. And this is why governments don't look at your GDP, which is just how much you make, but they say your GDP has to keep growing for a government to survive. You have to keep making more than you have. Like, it's an endless cycle, and that's why. Then, if you remember the 2008 bubble burst and all this kind of stuff, like people are borrowing more and more money until the governments couldn't pay it back anymore. It gets out of hand. So, to summarize, there's this thing called interest, which used to be called usury, and all the Abrahamic faiths have banned it originally. Now they kind of twisted it. It's only Islam that's kind of clear on that anymore. and this system forces you to make more than you need. That means you're mining the earth more unnecessarily. You don't want it to, but you have to. The system forces you to. And there's a lot of other dangerous things, like if it's this system is the only way you can pay for wars. If this system didn't exist, wars are too expensive. So, I mean, I don't want to go into too much, but wars are bad for the environment as well, I guess, right? But there's so many bad things about it, right? That's why it's been banned. So, what do you understand about that? What do you feel? Does it feel wrong? I mean, any thoughts about
I
it? Is it
use
confusing?
really as a system which is used in which the money often exploits the working people. I'm not sure if that's exactly correct.
Yeah, I mean, it's robbing the poor and paying the rich more. So it extracts money.
Like a lot of
So
these, I'm no economist, but a lot of these economic systems, they're really designed to squander the wealth of the lower classes. And I think that's why certain politicians in the past tried to effectively ban these systems, because they were effectively, like, I know, for example, if it's okay to mention Gaddafi, I know that he was trying to revolutionize the African financial system because there was a lot of exploitation. And the problem is that a lot of people, especially in the West right now, like I've had this a lot of speakers call it, they'll say, oh, the problem is capitalism. And interesting, actually, I did a whole live stream, well, no, it wasn't a live stream, but I did a whole video about this with somebody a while back, and me and him were talking about this and talking about money and capitalism. And it's like a lot of people think capitalism is this evil system, but it's such a reductionist approach. The problem isn't really capitalism or communism. The problem is really the use of wealth as exploitative means. And what I really can't stand about the left, about people on the left, is that they try and act like almost like martyrs. They almost want to say, oh, we're so righteous because we don't care about money. It's like there's this real hatred of anyone who desires to make money and accumulate and wants to work hard and wants to acquire wealth is automatically viewed as evil. And I think this is quite messed up, because when you have this view of like anyone who wishes to acquire wealth or acquire abundance is a bad person, what you're actually doing is it's like you're almost telling people that the desire for meritocracy, the desire for hard work and the work ethic is bad. I think that's why a lot of people who are perceived as, say, being right of center in any sense of the word are automatically viewed as terrible people. That's why there's a lot of hatred against, Jordan Peterson, for example. I know that you and I both, a lot of people are not with many of his modern political views, but regarding his economic views, I think that, he's very, very libertarian for what I know, and he's very practical, and he has those kind of good values about, working hard and being, making something of yourself. And I don't really like this whole modern culture of wanting to just criticize anyone who has a desire to acquire wealth, because not everyone who wants to acquire wealth is necessarily evil. Like if you look at J.K. Rowling, for instance, she started off as being, very poor and very, not poor, but, she was not wealthy, right? And she was also at one point homeless and on benefits. And it's like, because she acquired, millions, it's like, why are we going to now turn and hate on her for acquiring a lot of money? And I think that it's like anyone who starts low and suddenly becomes wealthy, a lot of them become attacked when they say something that doesn't quite fit into the mainstream narrative.
Yeah.
It's just so ridiculous,
Yeah, so there's a lot of complainers or whingers who don't want to improve their lives and just kind of hate on other people. And I'm really glad you had this really balanced sort of view that, sure, there's something going on with capitalism that's not quite right, but it doesn't mean you go, it's capitalism's fault, And it's, again,
capitalism, I think the problem is corporatism. Because capitalism is in the true free market, the desire to acquire wealth is very different to the corporate monopoly of wealth. And the corporatism of money is actually far more, almost more in line with communism in a way. You've got this small cabal of greedy people who want to sit there and hoard all the money. They both system, the bureaucrats versus the corporations. They're not that dissimilar from
So, I mean, okay, so what is capitalism? It's just saying that you're willing to pay for goods, essentially. Okay,
well,
there's nothing wrong with that.
In which a person wishes to acquire capital. I mean, am I not a practicing capitalist by selling books? Are you not a practicing capitalist by you sell courses, right?
Yeah, I teach, whatever. There's money, right? Yeah. The opposite of capitalism is communism. So let's touch on this really quickly. So there are people who think it's really good to promote an idea that they know that has failed in the past called communism. So very quickly, for people who don't know, communism has caused huge starvation, killed probably the most people ever. Like the communist dictators killed the most people, but also caused starvation for generations because very quickly, what it is that let's say I'm teaching. Who decides how much I can charge? The government can't decide every tiny thing. So it fails, it stops working. So you need this voting system called money. You might think, how is money a voting system? It's like a personal voting system. So everybody looks at, there's lots of teachers like me, whatever, and people offer different prices and people say, yes, I agree or not agree, that kind of thing. It's a localized voting system. That's all money is really, right? And so without that, it's really hard to price things and then things fall apart. There's also the meritocracy thing as well. People do need a little bit of incentive. I work harder, I get more stuff, whatever, right? You do need some sort of balance. So there should be some basic things like in Islam, you get all the basics that you need to survive: shelter, water. I can't remember the others, right? 4 things. You get food, whatever. All the basics so you don't die and you can't be exploited by capitalism, or I don't want to say capitalism, by evil people. Because pure capitalism could be, oh yeah, well, let's have prostitution, let's have whatever, right? No rules, right? But that's probably not good. We don't want. Sorry?
That's liberalism.
Yeah, or they call it laissez-faire capitalism, like no rules. Yeah. So yeah, whatever.
Well,
so
it's that the market decides, but yeah.
Yeah. So we want certain rules as well, some sort of behavioral rules on top, right? But okay, so where was I going? Because I want to stick on environment. Where was I going? So yeah, capitalism by itself, not a bad thing, has its benefits definitely, but there are dangerous things. What are the dangerous things? One, I mentioned already, the usury thing. The second thing you talked about was a sort of greed and exploitation kind of thing, maybe the corporatism you call it, right? And there's a lot of, where does the greed come from? It's not like we're just pure evil. Well, some people incline to more evil things, of course, but there are some systems that make us more evil. So I think I will go into some of those things quickly, I suppose. Just looking at... Okay, the high view, the high level view is there's 2 things that make us unhappy, and when we're unhappy, then we try to compensate. Like we're really unhappy, then we buy stuff we don't need to impress other people. But we're deeply unhappy, and however much we buy, that doesn't help. That's kind of the high level view. And the 2 things essentially are a lack of relationship with God and a lack of relationship with the rest of the world. Like people, the environment. If you're really miserable by yourself, what are you going to do? You're going to turn to Netflix and say, I'm going to keep watching that, but you're never going to be happy. You're just going to be more miserable, and you're going to pay for medication. Unfortunately, I know there's so many people on antidepressants and stuff, right? There's something really wrong in society. So we're spending money on stuff we don't really, ideally, we shouldn't have to have. Yeah, and other stuff as well, compensating millions of other ways. So those are the kind of things I want to dig into. And as I said, the kind of things I'm going to offer as advice are really different. And people might say, how can you say you need God? I'll touch on that really briefly. Psychologists know that if you have a belief in God or a belief in religion, that massively improves your mental health. Okay, 2 kind of essential reasons, like the existential, meaningful thing. You might not realize it, a lot of people, because people don't understand the history of psychology, but very quickly, psychologists are all saying that we need meaning. We need this word needs to, that's so absolutely essential for our happiness. Okay, so without God, you can't really have meaning. That's quite a complicated argument, but I can go into that at some point. But I'd kind of want to focus on the environmental side. And then with religion, you also get society gels together. Loads of people like to claim that society comes together by itself. No, it doesn't, because as society becomes godless, it becomes more individualistic. And we know, like in London, for example, we've got loneliness is the biggest killer, despite there being 7-8 million people in London now. I can't remember. Do you know? Sort of. I think it was 7 before, but is it how many?
I think it's around 10 million.
Are you kidding me?
I
Really?
think yeah.
Wow. That's crazy how fast it's improving. Like the numbers are going up. It's really crazy. We've got like 1 million comments, and I don't like to ignore the comments, but okay. So we'll look at the comments quickly, and then I'm going to jump into a really unusual solution. Bubblegum bank over fees. Let me see some new comments. I was just talking about this as James. Sorry, Bubblegum, I don't want to skip your one, but I'm going to go to a few new ones. John Vance. We're all light wave energy. Okay, I'm not sure if that's going to help us though solve our problems. One more comment before I talk about this very different idea. You can shape your own reality with your thoughts. I don't think so. You can try it though. Just having thoughts is not good enough, I think. Okay.
I think what you mean that you start with having thoughts, because if you want to change a reality, you have to start with a thought, right? I mean, if you look at all these books behind
fair enough. That makes
sense of reality. Like, it's somebody's brain and somebody has an idea or a concept, and that, manifests itself into a concrete reality. You could say that with the technology that we're using. You could say that with books. I mean, it's kind of strange that the gentleman, or I'm assuming it's a fellow, said you can't change the world or change events in history, because really creating your own reality, you are changing the world. Like, for example, if I have an idea to start a new women's movement, that's a non-feminist women's movement, that is literally altering time. It's creating a ripple in time. So every little thing that you do, every action you take, everything you decide to do does create a ripple in time. That's what this idea of, like, divine intervention or whatever is. It's creating a ripple in time. And I think that people need to understand this, that actually this very self-defeatist attitude of, no, you can't do anything, everything's terrible. I mean, look, I'm not Pollyanna. Like, I get really sick and moany just as much as the next person. But where I think maybe a lot of people differ is that I get really moany and say, oh, everything's shit, but I still go on. And maybe that's what a lot of people don't do. They're like, oh, everything sucks. The environment sucks. Carbon emissions, woke, terrorism. But they forget. It's like, that's what I was saying at the start of the stream. You have to take the positive with the negative. And that's the point. You can't be so positive. It's like everything's happy, but you can't be so negative. Everything's crap. It's the same. It's always the same, really.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you for kind of correcting me there. I'm not. Or sometimes I think people go too far and I can just think things and it will happen. No, but everything does begin with thinking as well, though. You do have to have an idea, but you have to act on the idea and be persistent in a long-term sort of fashion. Then you do get results. And yes, you're right as well. You shouldn't just moan. There's always been so many different phases in history. There were good government, bad government, a mix of different things happening. We can say, you know what, things were better at X time in a certain particular way. If it had happened in the past, it can happen again. We shouldn't just give up. And the people who give up are basically people who are too selfish to bother changing the world for other people. They don't want to make the effort. That's the reality. Okay, we've got to be a bit more responsible and feel that we've got a responsibility to our society to actually do something rather than just complain and whinge. Okay, so here goes. Way too much time taken to get to this point, but here's something strange. When the role of men and women changed, we started industrializing food, and that caused a massive knock-on effect. So that might be really shocking and surprising. Actually, I kind of want to introduce this thing where I'm going to give references and things like that, right? So this is part of my happiness book. Each video or each live stream we're doing is based on a chapter. This one's, the environment, how to sort of fix it the easy way. And there are lots of really easy ways, small changes that make massive knock-on effects, okay? And so there's a TED Talk which inadvertently described this historical situation, which happened in around the 1950s. and there's a link to it. And this guy did not intend to make this point. But if you look at it from this perspective, you're like, oh, okay. And he said basically what happened is there was a point in time around the 1950s where people had their own little mini farms, and they had their own horse and all that kind of stuff. And it's not actually too different to a lot of societies like where I am. Well, I live in a city, but like there's a village part of it, and people they have horses just walking around the village and stuff like that, and grow a lot of their own food. So they were all locavores. People don't have oranges and things like that, and actually you don't need all the millions of different fruits that we have. I think fruits are grown in certain areas are beneficial for those areas. But anyway, the point is, when after sometime after the Second World War, where women got encouraged to go to work rather than go to home, and you can disagree with this, Serena, it'll be very interesting what you think. People devalued being at home, but being at home didn't just mean taking care of the children. It meant cooking food and stuff like that, and even a whole bunch of other things surrounded by, taking care of growing food and stuff like that. And very quickly, we came to the natural sort of reality, which we face even today, that very few people used to start cooking less and started getting more frozen food. Now, on the face of it, frozen food doesn't sound so bad. And it's been a general that I really recommend going to the description, watching that video, okay, because there's a lot of shocking things like kind of the gradual acceptance of the crap that we eat, okay. All this frozen mass-produced food is really like shocking if you go into some of the details, right? And that only happened when women stopped cooking at home. And you can't have it both ways. You can't be at work and then be knackered and cook. It kind of doesn't work. And there's a million other problems that have come about, but I'm kind of trying to avoid them. Kind of like this kind of there's like population implosion. It's not an accident. You can't have it both ways. You can't have women essentially doing two jobs, being a mum and working at the same time. And it's really inefficient for many other reasons. But essentially, if you watch that video, you'll see that we slowly start accepting non-home cooked food, more frozen food, more badly produced food. So a really funny example he gives in the early stages of this kind of acceptance is margarine. Margarine, I think, do you eat margarine? I'm just interested. Do you eat margarine or do you go for butter?
Butter's healthier.
Yeah, so I think we've become more educated, right? But when I was younger, margarine is normal. People ate white bread. I think, do you eat white bread or brown bread?
I don't really eat bread. I stopped eating bread a few years back. But if I do eat it occasionally, then it's usually brown.
Okay, is that kind of like
protein, and I eat like high protein, low carbs. I don't really, well, I said I don't eat carbs.
Ooh,
I mean, I
interesting.
Pizza, but I try not to have it too often.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So, I mean, I think people become more. We went through a phase where we accepted all the crap, and now we're kind of being educated out of it a little bit, and we're kind of going, oh, okay, this is more healthy and all that kind of stuff, right? So the funny little story, I recommend really watching the video, because with the visuals, you kind of, and the slower version of what I'm saying, you kind of appreciate it more. Like margarine, when it first came out, they dyed it pink because they said this is fake, which we accept now. Again, we kind of gone around and realize how bad it is. Kind of like, but if you look at most of the foods that are processed, whatever, you just look in the ingredients, like there's all these chemicals in it, B this, A this, X, Y, Z, whatever. That's not normal. Why would anybody naturally want to eat that? But we don't, because we're blind to it. You know, it's just a label, right? The more closely we live to the land, the more you realize, what is this rubbish? Like, I'm just going to eat what I got from my garden and stuff like that. I mean, I don't do that completely, but you can do a lot more of that than you realize. Yeah. So food became industrialized as a consequence of gender relationships falling apart.
Yeah,
That's
so
my
I was going to
summary.
comment on that. I was
Go
going to
for it.
say,
Yeah.
obviously, in relationships, for example, if you've got, say, a married man and woman who both earn a lot of money, like, say, I don't know, they're both lawyers or something, then they can afford to hire a maid who can cook the food. And that's where I guess you have a solution. Like, for example, because as you know, I know that you and a lot of Muslim men or religious men seem to be very, very against women outside the home. And the reason why I never say I'm against women working outside the home is because there are a lot of women who do work very hard. But what I say is that I always differentiate between women who have a genuine, say, follow a genuine profession. Like, for example, I'll bring up like someone like Marie Curie or Margaret Thatcher. These were women who are pursuing an actual profession, as in they weren't just working for the sake of working. So there's a difference between a woman who's, say, pursuing something she genuinely cares and is passionate about versus a woman just doing menial labor. And the idea of the whole just doing a job, that's kind of, like you mentioned, obviously men are more mechanical. That's more like men. Men are more made to, it's men working in the factories, men doing these things. But in terms of like, something that's like an actual calling, like say being a nurse, being a teacher, being a psychologist, being a painter, like this is what women tend to prefer to do more. And this is what's really undervalued in our society. I think our society really undervalues women's contributions because we've become so like obsessed with like STEM. It's really really obvious. It is since the Industrial Revolution. Everything that's like scientific, technological, that's what our society values and prioritizes. Whereas anything that is artistic or humanitarian just isn't valued. And these jobs are really underpaid. Like women actually earn less money, and feminists also call sexism, but it's not really sexism. It's actually because I think our society just undervalues. I would argue it's actually more because of feminism, because feminism has really pushed for women to want to do more and more male jobs. It's like they keep wanting to say more women in STEM, more women in politics, and they're ignoring all of the things that women do already. Actually, I think Marissa and me were messaging about this, and she was saying how feminists they devalue women. They don't. It's like they don't want to say that women have always been strong. Women have always had a place, and I can't stand it as well. How feminists constantly also want to say the most liberating thing for a woman is to get a job. Because personally, I think the most liberating thing for a woman is to be a wife, be in love. I think that's the most, for me, that is true liberation. Like finding a man that you love and want to spend the rest of your life with. I think that's empowerment. I think that's liberating. Pursuing a profession, women who become so obsessed with their careers as well, even if you love your career, like I obviously love writing, it's usually because the woman doesn't really have any love in her life. And I think women who become so obsessed with their careers, it's probably because they don't have a man, they can't find someone to spend their life with. So that becomes their whole world. And that's again something which feminists never really talk about.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, there's so much data coming out. So I mean, there's so many things you touched on. I will touch on them briefly. The thing about STEM, like forcing women to go into STEM when naturally they tend not to. Okay, like there's loads of studies that women. Essentially there's a fun. Go on. Say again?
No, just saying, yeah, most, and that's also good. Like the women who do genuinely want to do STEM, who are good, like Rosalind Franklin was a chemist. The women who do want to do STEM, engineering, law, fantastic, good job. But they are the minority. And I think just let those women do those jobs and not try and say, it's like if you have a company with say 100 people, and if like 10 of them are women and 90 of them are men, if the women are all doing their job and getting along just as fine as the men, we don't need to import more women. We could just say, no, let's leave it be as it is.
Yeah, let kind of merit take over. Don't force women into a job. If there's a woman's better at it, let the woman do it. But if you have a smaller percentage of women interested in the STEM idea, and you got 90% like versus 10% sort of thing, then the chances are you're going to have more men, and just the way it works out. And if you got one or two women here or there, and they just happen to beat everybody else, let it be, right? Okay, so the essential thing is, apparently, according to Joan Peterson, and I think I've checked this up as well, is that the most evident thing or most evident difference between men and women is that women are more interested in people and men are interested in things. So men see things as sort of mechanical, and that's beneficial if you're industrializing or making things efficient. So basically, instead of a person doing a job, a man will create a robot, which involves mathematics and a whole bunch of other related things. And so that makes society more efficient. And we can see, as they say, men have essentially made society. They build the bridges and whatever. And there are also women, but relatively few, right? So it's just more efficient to have that dynamic, and it's better for the environment if we're more efficient with our resources. But there's also that other thing about, like, people don't understand the massive knock-on effects of not cooking at home. Like, even now in the UK, very few people cook at home. They say 50% cook at home, but they include cooking as warming up food. That's not really cooking. You're still getting this industrialized food with millions of chemicals, which have been transported all over the world, causing loads of environmental harm. Do you know what I mean? So lots of unnecessary damage to the environment. So that's one idea. As a feeling, what do you think about that idea of the knock-on effect of not cooking at home has caused the industrialization of food, which
it's
is
obviously made food much healthier. I know a lot of young people eat like ready meals. I mean, a lot of people don't know how to cook. I mean, I'm not the most amazing cook in the world, but I know how to make basic things like meat, vegetables. You know, I can make a good lentil stew. Like, a lot of people don't know how to cook. And I think this is quite dangerous as well, because I think if you can't make a meal, I mean, this is a basic skill, really, like the ability to, get food together, make it from scratch into a meal. This is and a lot of people, they do just eat ready meals, fast food. A lot of university students, I know, they like pot noodles or
yeah, but people don't realize the knock-on effect. It's like the little one domino hits the bigger domino, and it creates a massive effect that we don't realize. That historically, and I do, as I say, I recommend people watching that video and seeing that historical thing happen, like that kind of historical story that the guy presents. And he's not even giving it as an example of why society, the environment got destroyed, but he points it out inadvertently, let's just say. So he's not like a biased person, let's just say. He's kind of presenting this by accident. So the people don't realize the knock-on effect. So I would just say, watch that video. I think it's really helpful. I want to move on to, because there's so many other things. So that is a small thing. It's kind of a small thing if people can realize that. And I want to point out very quickly, there's so much data coming out to say that it's actually impractical to have a society where men and women behave exactly identically and both go out to work. And you mentioned the thing about getting a maid. There's another. Have we ever talked about the two income trap?
Well, no, I was saying as in if you can afford a maid, not as in like,
sure.
If you can afford it, then why not? Like, as in if both the man and the woman are both high-powered professionals, or say they're both very, very wealthy, and they can afford a maid or somebody to cook for them, what's wrong with that?
Sure, in theory that makes sense. What I'm saying practically, there's a lot of studies that are coming out. One interesting thing worth looking at is something called a two-income trap, where you actually end up paying, so you have a lot of overheads. You have to pay for child. So I can't remember. There's some massive proportion of women's salaries go to child minding, for example. Not child minding, it's the word, like taking care of children because nobody's at home. And there's also psychological trauma that goes with that as well. Like children raised by non-parents don't get touched as much, and then they feel disconnected from human beings as they grow up.
Well, that's the trouble. Actually, I want to bring this up. One of my favorite novels. It's called I Don't Know How She Does It, and it's by Alison Pearson. And it's such a great novel because it's about a woman who works as a fund manager, and she loves her job. You know, she's passionate about her job, but all she thinks about is her children. Like, she spends the whole book just thinking about her kids, and eventually at the end she quits her job and she and her husband move to a small house in the countryside, because it's like, you know, in the end, like, that's all she can do. Like, she's at work and she's doing this job, and then she starts fantasizing about having an affair. She loses sexual interest in her husband. So really, that book is really about the failures of feminism, about how, well, yes, there's nothing wrong with wanting to have ambition and all that. But maybe again, because I think when I talk about ambitions, I'm talking about the minority of women. Like most women are not like me. Most women are not, like again, otherwise I write books. It's a very, that's not really a job. That's a passion. And a lot of women, they get a job because they think they have to get a job, not because they're actually passionate about something. For most women, they would really like to just be with a man, be a mother, be a wife, stay at home with their kids, meet other ladies, go for tea. Like, I think these are the things that women would like to do, but they just can't.
Yeah, I mean, there was I haven't. Yeah, I haven't got the stats for this, but I watched it on what's it called? A YouTube video with Chris Williamson. Do you know the guy, Chris Williamson? He's kind of slightly bald, British guy. Anyway, so he said he does a lot of very interesting sort of videos about dynamics between men and women, relationships, and all this kind of stuff. He said that they did a kind of call it survey or something, and the statistics were men were happier when they got a job, and women were happier when they left their job, generally speaking, because it's just like men just function differently,
and women want to feel looked after. It's interesting, it's quite symbolic. I think that ultimately that desire lies in every male and female. It's the masculine imperative to look after someone and care for someone, and it's the feminine imperative and desire to be looked after and be cared for. It's like, for example, if a woman's already made it in life, if she's like got loads of money, if she's traveling everywhere, then a man comes along, it's like, well, what, I don't feel needed. Like, what can I contribute? Where if it's a woman still getting herself together and a man can come along, it's that whole thing of, oh, she's still getting together. I can come, I can show her the ropes, I can help make her life better. Like,
there are so many things. Yeah. There are so many things related to that. And maybe we need to do like a separate thing about just that kind of man-women dynamics. But even the kind of affair things about, like you mentioned, it's kind of actually a natural thing. When women work, they're too tired, and you can't have sex when you're too tired. Men function differently. They can, like, anytime. It's just like, you know what I mean? So they're essentially, men and women are so different. I want to touch really quickly in the last few minutes on the other ideas.
I realized we're supposed to be talking about the environment, and now I've gone off onto my anti-feminist.
No, it's not. No, I think there are a lot of questions people have. Like, they go, "Oh no, you can't do this. You can't separate the roles because we're too poor and all this kind of stuff." And the example you gave was so true, that when you're happy, you need less anyway, right? Stuff like that. There's so many solutions that people don't want to look into. So it was good that we went into a little bit. And I do like to, let's say, I like to respect the person who's in the stream. So I kind of like specialize in the direction that you're interested in. Do you know what I mean? Or whoever's given up their time to actually be on the stream. So I value that. And anyway, the other things I've kind of touched on. So there's a system. I've already talked about the system, which artificially makes us mind the world more than we need to. It's called the ancient name for it is usury, but now we call it interest. And there's loads of kind of evidence that, I'm not sure if I link it here, but I'm quickly looking at my document. But there's lots of like relatively modern examples where they gave up this usury system. There's called a Wurgel miracle. Wurgel is a town in Wurgel. I think it was Wurgel. Shortly after the Wall Street crash after World War I or something, and they gave up their money. They left interest. They made it's a little town, and they made loads of money just by doing roughly describes an Islamic system, which is no interest and taxing unused money. And that's getting very economical, but it's very easy to, first of all, interest is not necessary. One of the bubblegum said, Elijah. Okay.
Has he come now?
Yeah, okay, Elijah, I know I recognize you. Yes, I did see you before. I had a feeling like you hadn't come on the stream before, but now I do remember. Okay, Elijah's really interesting. We've only got a few minutes. Did you think it was like Did you get the times mixed up or what happened? I'm trying to understand.
I think I said 8. Oh, wait, hang on.
We
I think we
finished
said
at 8.
7, didn't we?
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. So I think my laptop might have been. It's not my. It's an old laptop, so it could have been an hour behind. I'm not sure actually.
Oh, okay, no problem.
Oh, okay,
Elijah's
no
a really interesting person that I wanted to talk about the environment with. Maybe we'll jump into something just for the last few minutes. Okay, so why I like Elijah is I think we both got this kind of thing about. So you spent some time in Portugal, or you go every
That's
year
correct.
in Portugal? Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Kind of. Sorry. Yeah, you're saying yeah.
Yeah. Okay. The kind of things that I really enjoyed kind of emailing you, even though it's a few times or something. It was like kind of like the whole olive trees thing. Like you can't appreciate it until you try it. Like picking the olives, living off the land a little bit. And I've got a house in the village where we just all year round there's something to get from. I think. Did you say you make wood fires and stuff like that? You kind of.
Well, yeah, it's quite basic living actually. So
Yeah, but the
my
same
background.
in the village house. We have wood fires. Like we have, it's actually quite common here in Jordan. They kind of give all the trees a massive haircut. All the trees, and like it's not just my house. Loads of. Do they have that in Portugal as well?
I guess it depends what level of development you live in. Because mine's quite primitive. It's just a caravan. And just trying to get a wood stove put together. But otherwise, I cook outside on wood anyway. So as far as the heating goes, the temperature does drop a little, but there's blankets, sleeping bags, hot water bottles, that kind of thing. So I don't have a heating in there as yet. But
cool. I mean, all of that is really interesting because I'm not the best at that because I'm not staying in my village home at the moment because it's too hard for me because it gets so cold at night. But I mean, or whatever in the winter, but that's warming up again. But so I appreciate that, and I think let's touch on this really quickly. Maybe we can come up with something here. When I say come up with something to do with what you're just saying, and it'll be interesting what you think, Zarina, as well. Okay. I'll touch on a random thing that we haven't touched on, which is about the cold thing, right? In traditional Jordanian houses, people just wear a million layers. They wear their coat inside, right? They use wood fires, but it's not like an open wood fire. It's like a metal cabin, and the smoke goes out, right? There's something to be said about like a sort of a healthy relationship with the seasons. Like Jordanians, though, and we know it's cold, but we don't mind slowing down. And what else do they say? Like I was in a taxi, and the guy goes, "The seasons are like husband and wife or something," and the Arabs say things in a strange way, but it does make sense. Like if it was hot all the time, the earth would be dried out, everything would be dead. So you have a few months maybe of cold weather, people slow down, the weather slows down, you get more water. And I feel like people are so much more in touch with nature here, so much more close.
I think Khaled's screen has timed out. It's nice to meet you anyway, Elijah.
Yeah, it's nice to meet you also. I've seen you a few times around Speaker's Corner. We've never really spoken.
Yeah.
And I'm normally on the side there with Marisha, but she told me a little bit about you, so it's good to finally meet you anyway in some way.
Sure. Did you want to ask anything?
Sorry. So my connection's blipping out a little bit. What was that you said? Sorry.
Did you want to ask anything?
No, just interested about your perspective. You know, it's quite refreshing to hear a female, you know, not kind of going with the popular concept of feminism and actually challenging it, which is quite different nowadays. You don't really get many females being critical of at least not publicly, being critical of the feminist movement. So I think, can I ask what was it that inspired you to take on that angle?
Yeah, I've been criticizing the feminist movement for quite several years, really, and started because I've been studying feminism. Well, when I was younger, I was actively involved in the feminist society in my sixth form, and I kind of identified as a feminist. Sorry, Calla, we just kind
No,
of
keep going. So
identified as a feminist and liberal feminist, and then I sort of started to do my own research into feminism, and I read a lot of well, several books, but more like a lot of articles, and I watched a lot of videos, and really dug a lot into the whole like the theory behind feminism and these ideas like patriarchy theory and rape culture and the male gaze, and just kind of really unpacked. And it's like a lot of feminist theory is really rooted around the very core premises, which really is that men are shit and let's blame everything on men, which is really the biggest problem I found with feminism. And I found that it really devalues women because it makes women feel like they're victims, and it makes women feel like they don't have any agency. So I just started to get interested in it, and I was like writing about feminism from 2017 on this blog that I have. And so yeah, for quite a few years, and then I started only going to Speaker's Corner middle of last year. And it surprises me because what really baffles me is how most people are very uninformed about feminism. I think because the media has really made people think feminism just means equal rights. And it always shocks me when I see men say, oh, yes, I'm a bit of a feminist, because I think they don't understand what feminism is. They think a lot of people confuse feminism with female empowerment. And it's like supporting women's rights or women's voices isn't the same as supporting feminism, because feminism is specifically a political ideology, whereas just supporting women means you're supporting women. Like anyone, you can support women's voices without supporting a political ideology.
So I'm just going to try to wind this up because we've already got over time, but I really wanted, I got cut off because I thought my internet's going to be really good here, but I think something dodgy happening. I was talking a lot, something about being in touch with nature. Do you want to say a few words, because you've got a lot of experience in that and how it relates to environment? We just do a little bit of that, and then I'll be very interested in what Zarina's got to say about that, and then we just kind of finish off. But Elijah, go for it. I just want to hear you.
Yeah, what I'd say most importantly is when moving from an industrialized environment to then trying to adapt back to a natural environment, it takes a lot of, I guess, resilience, because when you're used to a certain way of life, but then voluntarily choosing to go with less, there's that, I say, an adaptation period where, you sometimes question yourself and ask yourself whether it is the right direction to go in, even though, your comfort zones kind of get shifted about a little bit. The way you have to do everything suddenly changes. But after you get through that period, and say for me personally, it lasted maybe about 6 months, and that was constantly living in a more and more simpler, more primitive way of life, if you like. But after that, you realize the joy and the freedom that comes with that. You find yourself having more time to do things that you feel you want to develop and grow in. You're not spending all of your time just to make a living, if you like. But the busyness is kind of contextual. So you're busy in order to develop the land so it can produce, so it can meet your needs. So it doesn't feel like an indirect, I have to go to work to get money to then live. It's almost like a more of a direct connection with what you're striving for.
So I suppose I totally agree that being within this, if you're a city person, which I grew up in, and relatively less experience in sort of village lifestyle or the down-to-earth lifestyle of Jordan, you do become relatively soft, and it takes time to toughen up to accept that kind of lifestyle. Like my father-in-law's, like essentially was still kind of a Bedouin mindset. It doesn't. It's like it doesn't matter to him that it's freezing cold inside the house, kind of thing. So that's cool. I suppose my quick question is, do kind of want to wind up, but the thought is, how practical is that to go or revert? I think that's quite a tough thing to do for the whole of society, to revert back to basics lifestyle. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I think it's not really something that all of society will do. I mean, I think in this day and age, we have a lot of choice due to, technology or being able to get somewhere relatively quickly as opposed to in the past, So it's always going to be a niche. You could call it a bit of a niche endeavor in this day and age. But you got to remember that a lot of the world do still live in a very simple, primitive way. I mean, power showers and refrigerators and radiators. It's only something that most of the developed world can afford and has that infrastructure in place. But you go further out the cities, and most of life is like that.
Cool.
So.
You're right. We do take that for granted. And just some thoughts, Zarina. I think you've always been in a city. Have you ever kind of experienced anything different? Kind of like.
I mean, I was in York briefly, but I don't know if that really counts. I mean, I've only lived mainly in London and a little bit in Guildford for uni, but no, I've pretty much always been in London.
Sure, and me too, most of my life, right? So from that perspective, as most people live in cities, right? So most people live in cities, and so you'll be like most people. What do you think about this idea of? Okay, the title of my video was "Saving the Environment the Easy Way." What do you think about this idea of living back to basics? Just some thoughts. It's not trying to make any particular conclusions. I'm trying to just share some ideas just to finish off the video. Just any thoughts, like just kind of down back to basics. Maybe I don't know, living off the land, but like really cold, wearing millions of layers. I don't know, something along those kind of lines. It's a little bit tough. What are your thoughts?
I don't know what's the obsession with, let's all just be rural. I mean, that's fine, but also what's wrong with wanting the finer things in life? What's wrong with wanting to have things like, I don't understand this constant attack on wanting to, it's all material thing. Well, they're not actually. We all have material things. Most people watching this have material things. I mean, this is, again, it comes back to all this capitalism as shit, wanting to have things as shit, wanting to have necklaces as shit. It's like, well, no, it's not actually. So yeah, it's all fine if people want to live in a minimalistic lifestyle and have nothing and just wear plain clothes, but not everybody wants that lifestyle. No, I don't know. It's like, well, yeah, I don't know, man. I can't stand all of this absolutism all the time. It's like, it's got to be, everybody be a peasant or everybody be rich. It's just no, people are fucking different. People are different and people have different needs and desires. It's common sense.
I think that was a really good point. Everybody's different. I mean,
I don't want to be modest. I don't want to have nothing. I don't want to be poor. You know what I mean?
And I think it's too easy for the average person to say I don't know actually what the average person.
But also, who wants to be average? Well, fine if you want to be average. Not everybody wants to be average. Some people don't want to be average. I don't know what's wrong with wanting to aspire to like not be average. It's hatred of anyone who aspires to more than the average lifestyle. I mean, it's pain in the butt, really. I think people I think people are jealous. Actually, Khaled, you brought this up as well. You actually said this because it's like people who have nothing going on in their lives. Like you and I have spoken about this. People who have nothing going on for themselves will always be jealous of those who are at peace with themselves. Like people who are thriving, people who, someone like, for example, is quite a successful business and they're like sitting there with their business like, yes, I've got my business and my family, I worked hard, I came from nothing. Everyone's just gonna come and crap on them because they made something their life, or your life is shit. It's like, well, just because you have nothing, you got nothing going for yourself, you want to crap on someone else who knows what they want out of life. It's pathetic.
Sure. Yep, agreed. So so some people instead of finding solutions for their own lives, find it easier to complain about other people. Okay, cool. I really want you back, Elijah, another time.
Sure, yeah. Apologies for the timing issue. Yeah, I'm not sure what happened.
You know what I think it is? You're still in Portugal, nomad lifestyle.
Oh no, yeah. I mean, even though I'm back in London, it's
reacclimatizing to.
I don't have too much in the way of kind of technology, so I borrowed this laptop to make this call. And I don't know if the time was wrong on here. I'm not so sure. I mean, it
didn't automatically update. Anyway, I think now I've seen you again. I remember we spoke, and I think we can talk about more than just the environment. So we'll have you on another time. Maybe I'll message you about like the things you're mostly interested in. I'll show you like the whole course and all that kind of stuff. Very grateful that you came. You made the effort to borrow a laptop or something. I can't remember what you said. Did you borrow it? Yeah. Really, really appreciate anybody who comes and to have an interesting discussion with us. Thank you very much, Zarina, as well.
We should do a stream on Kala before we finish. I'd love to do a stream on like stories of like people who are homeless or broke who became multimillionaires. Like that was that guy that was he like invented some hair company or whatever. I always used to watch videos of that. This is so cool. For me, that's inspiring. People who are like,
are you talking about who's the hair company guy who has a ponytail?
Yeah, he went bankrupt twice. He was literally homeless. Bankrupt twice, became a billionaire.
He's the nicest guy who when he got his first paycheck and he gave his money, all his money to pay for somebody else's dinner or something. That guy began the P.
Such people exist. I can't remember his name. I don't know if it's really famous. It's
sure. I'll send you the link. I know the guy. I'm interested in all these kind of entrepreneurs. Okay, so I'll send you the video. You can tell me. I think I might squeeze that with some topic. I was going to do creativity with you next time, I suppose. But anyway, all right. Thank you, guys. We've gone way over time. I really appreciate anybody who comes to listen. Thank you, people in the comments, and we'll catch you next week. Thank you, Raj. Bye.
Thank you very much. Take care.
You too.
Bye.